When I was invited to take this on, I had the most daunting thing was to try and summarize the day. And as I'd written about 20 pages, I clearly already failed on the matter. But I'm just going to try and remind us of some of the things that were discussed earlier in the day in case you've forgotten about them. So Jan talked about health, happiness, and good humor, and the creation of public walks, park run, and how that's lasted for its great benefits, loud and breathing spaces, and many of these themes were returned to, and how the miasma was a driving force for countering, for design at the time. Of course, we now don't believe in that at all. But there was a lovely image of John O'Connor's embankment, which I think I would like to find again, I must say. But Jan ended on a very significant and depressing point, really, about 4 degrees warmer and how there's going to be migration towards the poles. And I don't mean in Poland. Change of attitude is required on climate. Robert then took us in much more granular terms to what had happened in Bermondsey 100 years ago, and how medical officers of health were so important in the forming of public spaces. And again, there's a lovely image, I think the Doré engraving of backyards, railway viaducts, and everything heated by coal. And the extraordinary Auguste Rollier with ultraviolet treatment to bolster immune system and vitamin D, and the disturbing image of the partially clad man who was allowed to have the treatment from the ultraviolet light. Outdoor beds were very important at that time. Implications for today. Parks to achieve a certain standard was, I think, a very significant thing that came out of your talk. Paul Rabbits then spoke about the role of public parks during COVID. But one of the things that struck me in particular, which you referred to in a way, Catherine, was the number of people who apparently didn't know how to use parks, and that when parks were reopened, they used parks differently and left it of rubbish because they were unaccustomed to using it. Also, another surprising fact to me was that there was a positive increase in wildlife. 60% of benefits of parks arise from contributions to health and well-being. And we'll come back, I think, at the end of the day to why some of these facts are so important in trying to change policy and lever money from those who have it. Jamie gave a very thought-provoking and dense talk about therapeutic gardens and the theories that support them, biophilia, and the various aspects of that. 3 schools approach: healing gardens, horticultural therapy, cognitive therapy. And I love the designer as the choreographer of experience. That's something to take on board. Catherine, we've just heard from, so I won't try and summarize all of your points again. But experiential learning, you emphasize how important that was. And the importance of outdoor spaces as we get older. 4 key qualities: access for all, access to nature, access to others, access to light. And I think your final point that you left us with, what are the interventions that are affordable that are going to be of most benefit to people? That's the question that we as designers and placemakers will be asked by policymakers and those who fund them. So a brief summary, if I can invite the panelists up here and start the discussion. Does anyone like to kick off? Yes, Ellie.
We've heard a lot today about the benefits of parks, and as someone said, it's been really well researched, and we all, the evidence is all there. But the question is, what do you do with this information, and how do we use it? And Catherine ended up talking about interventions, and one thing that hasn't been mentioned all day that's been really important in making the case for parks has been the Green Flag Award scheme, which Paul knows all about. And basically it sets standards for open space, and it's got this really good manual that actually explains what parks managers do to answer. You talked about people think we just pick the litter up. It's much more complicated than that, but it's actually all set out in simple form in the Green Flag Award manual. So I hope we don't get that. But in summary, being a parks manager is getting a balance between all the different people using it and all the different pressures of land use. And do you have football pitches, or do you have wildlife, or do you have a play area? And it's about getting a balance in the middle of all that, and then writing a management plan and making it work. So I think that Green Flag Board has been a really important selling tool to politicians locally. That is a end product of a lot of stuff we've talked about today. Thank you.
Is that something, Paul, you use still?
Green Flag? Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, close to know what Green Flag is. It is the quality standard for parks. So I think a blue flag for beaches, green flag for parks. Managed by Keep Britain Tidy. The numbers are going up every year, but the number of authorities doing it is getting less. And we're finding now that some authorities, Nottingham's a good example. We know Nottingham have got financial problems, of many others. Nottingham, for instance, had the most green flags in the country. I think it's about 40 plus this year. Now the single figures, they just can't afford to put those applications in. There's a real pressure on green flag. I mean, I've been a green flag judge for 20 odd years. I think that should be the benchmark. And there's no way we can enter 27,000 parks into green flag. Absolutely not. Which I would love it. But I still think that the issue on quality is really, really important. And I know I said in my talk that COVID has shown that there are discrepancies as far as quantity and accessibility. But one of the things that we've always been told is actually quality matters, and that people will go that little bit further to something that's really, really good, rather than something that's really poor or a bit crap on the doorstep. They'll go that bit further. So we're in Norwich, we're now focusing on a new strategic hierarchy of parks. We've a lot of parks. We can't have the same standard across the board, but we're focusing on those that really, really matter to people as far as wildlife, as far as ecology, as far as community, as far as culture. So it's absolutely, it's really important. You mentioned, Helen, about what do we do with the information?
Yeah,
there's a lot of information. I mean, we've seen today there's a lot of information, and again, the organisation that I work with and parts of the sector as far as promoting what you guys produce as far as academic scientific work is, who do we push that at? Well, yes, national politicians at the top, but I also think now, and I've said this before, and I said this at the last conference I was at, is that the ones who really make the decisions that matters to people outside of here is your local politicians. And those are the ones that we should be influencing. So we're all becoming like TikTokers, aren't we? We're social influencers. Get out and say, look, this is what matters. They're the ones that make the decisions. They're the ones that set the budgets. They're the ones that, actually make the real difference from day-to-day operations.
Yeah, one of the goals of a parks manager is selling parks to the local politicians.
Yeah.
A salesman, really.
You suggested, though, that enough research, that it was one of the closing remarks, and I just want to pick you up on that. So,
There is. I mean, I've is excellent. The research you continue to do is excellent. As Helen says, who do we aim that information at? You can almost have almost like information overload, right? And who do we get to listen, and how do we influence those people? That's the issue. And the problem that we've got at the top level with politicians is that they keep saying, we want more evidence. We want more. Well, we've got the evidence, yeah, but we want more. It's like going into a sweet shop, isn't it? Well, I want that, but I also want that. Tell me more. I want to know more. And I'll give a good example. 2017, a public inquiry in Park, huge piece of work that was done. It just died a death. And yet they're now talking about, back in 2017, we did this. So part of the problem is that politicians these days are very short term, with such a quick recycling of politicians and policies, isn't it? They move on from one thing, then they move on to the next thing. How do we get them to focus on the real things that matter based on the evidence that you continue to keep providing?
And you're the closest. Yeah. So
To
you're
what?
the closest to them, you're there.
Yeah.
So what's your answer?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
I mean,
You're the researchers.
you are, and we need to sell it. Right. So we need to sell it, and we need to sell it in a way that politicians get it and understand it. How many politicians in the room? Right. They're quite simple beings, aren't they? They like things relatively simple and straightforward, but they've got a very short attention span. So how do we sell it to them? So it's people like me that have to do that, and that's through good comms, celebrating the successes that we have. We have a lot of successes in parks and open spaces, whether it's opening up a children's play area or whether it's a community wood that's been restored with volunteers or whatever. But we tend to think do and then move on to the next thing. We don't celebrate. I think if we celebrated it more and show what the benefits are to politicians, they would get it more. And there's some very good models, some really good models on that.
Yes, something of all of us. How many horticulturists, parks managers, and landscape architects are politicians? Let me give an example. Joseph Paxton was an MP.
He was.
Yep. And before that, he had the ear of Prince Albert, hence the
He did.
the Crystal Palace.
Yeah.
That is a good example to follow.
Yeah.
So when are you going to sell?
I mean, landscape. I always remember when I was a humble landscape architect. How many landscape architects in local government get the top levels, chief executive level? I've known two. I don't know whether they're still working, but get rising to the level of being able to influence at that high level in local government.
Or chief executives in national parks.
Well,
Yeah.
no one.
Yes, exactly.
Christian.
I mean, this does relate to Helen's point and what you were saying about research as well, because I used to work for Natural England, and every time there was a change of government, each new government wants to repackage something. So you get the constant reinvention of the wheel. And because they want to put their own badge on something, which is an absolute pain in the backside. And I just remember working on Urban Fringe, and we were doing the research, and I think it was called the Rural Urban Fringe. Then the government changed, and we had to rebadge everything, and all of a sudden it was called the Countryside Ride Times. Now that costs, and also the problem is as well, the reason, I mean, there is a huge amount of research out there, because there must be masses of Natural England research around the therapeutic landscape stuff. We had 10 themes around about 2006. We were doing work with Landscape Design Associates and Bartlett School of Planning, University College London. And there was some fantastic research. I bet none of you have read it. And it's so important. And then all this work on multifunctional landscapes again, so you've got economic benefits, education, health, aesthetic. Yeah, all that was in there. Has anybody read that? No.
That was one of the great benefits of CABE Space, wasn't it?
Yeah.
It brings some of the
Yeah,
reason.
and also we had fantastic libraries, which don't seem to exist. I mean, a lot of this will be with the British Library or with Natural England's library now, deep somewhere else. But so that's important. And also, I think it's important for clients to do a literature search first because they sods, because they don't. So, do a brief.
Client,
No. But the client, no, sorry, the client does because the local authority, bodies like Natural England Environment Agency, in a way are the be-all and end-all because they come up with the idea, they find the funding, they do the brief, and often they might ask the consultants to do a literature search, but without the literature research, you're in danger of, again, reinventing the wheel and wasting hundreds of thousands of pounds. And so, if you look at all the paper that I don't want to throw in the wells, you've probably seen no end of toolkits created over the past 20, 30, 40 years. Now, apart that one, the other point I wanted to mention was how can all this knowledge be used to influence policy to stop governments from encouraging local authorities to sell off or offset public owned spaces? Now, that really is important because I know Birmingham started, so,
Question.
and yeah, but it's like, because I think landscape architects shouldn't just be interested in design, because I think, in a way, the more important thing to influence is the policy.
Going
Yeah, hold that. And at the back, please, Rufi.
I suppose it's more of a statement and it's for Paul, really. You talked about in the new model to keep hold of our bringing in open spaces. And work I did with Future Parks Accelerator, I think you may have been touching on that in Newcastle, maybe? Everyone. The work we did was something on the lines of environmental justice. And what that included was just not the parks and open spaces, it's biodiversity, IND, data. So it's data. What we did was get a whole lot of data, flood as well, flooding, overlay that data and create a heat map for environmental justice. Now that, in answer to that lady's question, was a powerful tool. We introduced that to the planning department and they suddenly realised where they had all the housing allocation sites, oh, maybe we shouldn't do that because that's going to be a burden on the IND areas, people's health. We've got another indicator in there, years life lost. So such a powerful tool, and I think digital mapping is the way forward. And we don't do enough about as landscape architects. It's a great design tool as well, because we could demonstrate Keystone Company cabins here.
Have you made use of that tool?
Yeah, well, if you think it's just going back to McCarg and going back to the original origins of GIS, but the useful thing about it is that you end up condensing huge amounts of research into very simple documents that you can then interrogate. And for a lot of, one of the things about politicians or the rest of it, it's all this thing about time and effective use of time. And, I can understand that thing about there's too much research, because I deal with students all the time who say there's too much research. I can't get through all of this. So what is the shortcut? Okay. And the shortcut is producing something that looks at something in a very complex way that is incredibly simple to understand. And when you get something like that, it completely changes people's view. As designers, we will do mind mapping, we'll do bubble diagrams, we'll do analysis plans, all of that. But often it's the explanation of those to a client that convinces the client to do something. Often that's about how it's conveyed, how it's presented, how it's talked about and communicated. And one of the problems is communication. Again, it's one of these things which communication is very difficult with people who are constantly changing. So therefore, the person who's in position and currently might fully understand it, and it's on the wall, all of the rest of it, but they then get promoted out of that job. And the person who then comes in just has this diagram on the wall where they just go, I don't understand what any of it means.
Yes.
So that continual reinforcement of the message is hugely important.
And I'm sure, Catherine, you must experience this too.
Yes, I mean, we were involved in Edinburgh with a Future Parks Accelerator project as well, thriving green spaces, but absolutely concur. The idea of, bringing the environmental justice lens into discussions, I think is a very powerful political tool, along with health inequalities.
All right.
I just wanted to pick up on what Christine said about libraries. Because I don't mean libraries as collections of books, I mean libraries as hubs of knowledge. Because what you just said about the change of personnel and the knowledge is lost and that the attitude is lost. How do we crack that? How do we make the kinds of knowledge hubs that you guys, the landscape architects, landscape designers, the people who are working in that you need? Or is the challenge more, which I hear a lot from this sector, that there's just no time, the clients don't allow any time, no one allows any time to actually go and do any work? How do we get the information? So I think the knowledge is there. I don't think people aren't creating it. People are creating reports. How do we, from the library side, you from the practice side, how do we get there? That's a big question. But I mean, is that something we should be working on?
Yes.
Yes. You said you are working.
Yes. No.
No.
Oh, we used to have it. We used to have that. I mean, we had. You mentioned CABE Space. So you mentioned CABE Space. Like one of the best things that happened to the park sector in many years, and then the government at the time, I won't say which colour it was, but it wasn't red. Got rid of it. They got rid of it, and it was superb. You know, it was a boom time, and it wasn't millions and millions of pounds being pushed into the sector, but we were visible, and people acknowledged and recognised what it is we were all trying to do. CABE Space pulled it all together, and the biggest criticism we now get from government is that the sector is disjointed. It's disjointed. We Parks Management Association, we have tried, we still need that resource. When you've got organisations like Fields in Trust, which is the National Playing Fields Association, Grounds Management Association, Keep Britain Tidy, the Landscape Institute, the Chartered Institute of Horticulture, Natural England, who are now involved, and the National Trust, who are now involved. And there's a whole host of other organisations that have all got their fingers in the pie, but none of them are joined up and talk to each other and collaborate as they should do. Now, we tried, and if we could crack that nut, I think we've got a much better chance of influence people at a higher level, but also at the middle level.
And if I may, just on the information side of that, the information and knowledge side of that, you know, obviously local authority library provision is under to the point where it's gone. Central government, in the basement of this building is the library and the Ministry of Agriculture, Fisheries and Food, and of ADAS, Publication Archive of those institutions. So, you know, every 20 years, you know, whatever, government just decides we don't need libraries anymore, let's get rid of those, and then have to rebuild them and rebuild them. And I think you know, on the information side as well, on the knowledge side, there's a kind of a, we're down in the dumps. Never mind the kind of the collaboration at every level, just getting knowing who's got the information, how you get it out there, which seems extraordinary in a digital age that we find it harder to get information. But as we often say, garbage in, garbage out.
It was stamp of government. That's what.
Yeah, well,
what
ADAS
is
is, yeah, on agriculture.
I didn't.
Just a point following on from the mention of CABE Space. One thing they did that was really good, they used to run these leadership courses, and they took 1 or 2 weeks. And they were aimed at taking all these parks managers and sort of upping their skill and making them into salesmen, how to use this information and influence local politicians. But that was all stopped when they cut the funding. It didn't cost very much, but there's scope for maybe they.
Well, we've changed government again. Maybe it's time to
Maybe
make
there's
another
scope
push
for
on that.
some of the universities to start running short courses like that again.
I'd love to see a degree course in parks management.
Yeah, we need it.
Saying,
In Sins.
It's just really.
There is one.
that's crazy.
When I was a trustee, it was fairly recently with the Garden History Society, the Gardens Trust, and we did an analysis of how many courses there were around those kind of things, and there's nothing there. I'm convinced there would be a demand for it if it was marketed correctly. Depending on how you
With the Q code set off to fulfill that, but that, you know, that is diminished to 4 students this year. So it's
Can we take another question?
It's more a talking point, to be honest with you. So if we look back, and I'm going to say this, look back to the NHS when it was formed in good old 1948. it soon became such a gem and such an asset that any government of any colour, if they fiddle with it, they know they're going to get backlash. Now, there has been massive changes in the NHS by the back door, but they won't do it openly. So my point is that maybe we should really be concentrating the landscape and what it offers as a national gem, because all the time that we're not looking at it as an ultimate asset, governments will swing on political ideology on how they sort it out. So Norway and the Nordic countries, they got about 5 or 6 gems. We're down to 1, which I would say is the NHS that nobody dares touch. So it's just a thought that until something becomes such a big issue and such a big gem that nobody dare touch it, then all the time we're going to be fighting this ping pong. How do we do that? I'm not too sure, but I think your point about all of us and Landscape Institute especially need to be talking to each other a lot more and saying this is the lungs of the country, or however you want to promote it, but it has to be a gem. If it's not a gem and it hasn't got that precious asset value to all of us, then you're just going to get battered around within political ideologies.
A natural health service.
There you go.
A natural health service.
Very good.
Can I just come back to one point, which was about how we make use of information. I think one of the things that is really, really obvious is that the majority of landscape practices in the UK do very little research, have very few people engaged in research in their practices, and therefore their level of understanding of any of the complex issues is pretty surface-led. Okay, and therefore it means that there's no coherent will to research, which is completely different in America, where everyone has someone in practice who's actively engaged in really important research, and therefore it seems to be a much more coherent understanding of current information and knowledge rather than just surface level. But that's just me being academic. Sorry.
Now, so this is going to be the final question, because we're very close to our hard stop, and I don't want to get the evil eye from Guy. Guy,
Thinking back to what Paul said on the natural health service. So social prescribing, green prescribing, could we then just partner up with public health, NHS, and become one? Is that the new model? So all our parks are health parks.
Yeah, outline into their silos.
Green space. They're not just parks.
That's all to end the day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I just add one quick comment? I noticed, when you have these supplements for university courses that people can go on in September, whenever the A levels come out, landscape architect is never, ever there. It's never listed.
It's a battle.
It's never in any.
We were going to end on such a positive point. Sorry, no.
Just doing on that. Okay, so UCAS, if you actually search sensible A levels to become a landscape architect, landscape architecture doesn't come up.
No.
If you search on AI, landscape comes up number 2.
That's interesting.
Okay, and therefore the students, like my first year students this year, the majority of them had no information from teachers. They either became landscape architects on the course because of AI, or because they directly have someone in their family or their extended family who is a landscape architect or worked with landscape architects. Okay, and that's the situation we're in. That's why there's only 180, possibly a few more, 180 home students a year who study landscape architecture. That's it.
Right. on the note, it's 8:42, and I've been asked to thank those who are on remote access for joining us. And I imagine that they would like to have PDFs of the afternoon talks because they probably missed that. Thank you very much to the panel. Thank you to Annabelle, Chair of FOLAR, and thank you to Robert for organising the event.
Thank you.